Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with zero trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Katie J. Wells, welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. As I was saying, I know you are a very busy person, somebody who is constantly doing research. I've done that, and then it feels like every minute that I don't spend on my research, I have an anxiety attack.
Oh, no, Ahmed. See, I'm much more a tired person. I think it's wonderful. I think, you have to take breaks and, look at the sky.
Yes, right.
No, and it's nice, actually, this rhythm of getting to take I'm doing other research now, but no, I don't know. I think we already actually have all the books we need in the world and research done. We should just need more time to read them.
No, well, I agree with you, but I think we need books like yours. This is a great book. I really enjoyed reading it, and I want to talk to you about it. And I want to talk to you about many other things. I'm going to have you for the hour, I hope. Yes, wonderful. Okay. So this was actually recently published, right? In August of this year.
Yes.
I can feel that it's, hot out of the oven. And so I think I was one of the first to grab a copy of it. As I said, I enjoyed it very much. Your co-authors are, and I apologize for mispronouncing the names, Kafu Atto and Declan Cullen. So please correct me if you could.
You're fine. Kafu Atto and Declan Cullen. It's fine.
Wonderful. Yeah. And this was published by Princeton University Press, right?
Yes.
Wonderful, excellent. And I see that you've been on quite the whirlwind of a book tour, hitting many, and which is more fantastic because a book is a book, but then people have to go out and sort of evangelize for it. It's not going to happen by itself, right?
I agree, but I also think it's I don't think there's any point, right, of like writing a book to leave it on a shelf, right? Like we want to do this because we believe in public knowledge and sharing it and the Enlightenment Project. So I don't know. I think it's a bit of a responsibility to.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some people write the book just so that they have it under their belt and they move on. So I do appreciate when people actually go out and get the message out and try to distill it. It's hard to distill, right? I did attend one of your, I think it was in GW. It was great to see how, you invested in getting the message so that it can be communicated enough for people to pick up the book. So I do appreciate that as well. So you are a Fritz postdoctoral fellow, right, in Georgetown.
Yes.
And you've been there on that fellowship since 2021, and in Georgetown since 2018. Is that
correct?
Wonderful. So what does a postdoctoral fellowship person do, or fellow? What do they do? What is their sort of average day?
Well, I'm very lucky on these fellowships because these fellowships involve a lot of research and writing and working with students to train them in how to do research. So it has been a real gift of 5 years to spend time on campus, but mostly at home with my computer and warm tea, getting to think and read and write, and do a lot of guest lectures, both at Georgetown and elsewhere with students about the gig economy and how we can use it as a prism into contemporary life.
Yeah. And so that's interesting. There is also an aspect of engaging with students, which is, I think, probably fulfilling, right?
Absolutely. Oh, it's wonderful. And these students, I mean, they're amazing, right? I think of them more as colleagues often, right, than students.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think, or is it just me, that today's students are underestimated and they are probably more knowledgeable than us when we were their age? I don't know. I just have this feeling that they are more aware. What do you think?
That's a great question. I mean, I didn't go to a college like Georgetown. I went to Ohio State. So I am just blown away by these students and their capacity to communicate orally and with written forms. But again, you know, Georgetown is such a funny slice into the world. I think many of my colleagues at other universities would not be singing the praises of their students. You know, but that being said, I think many of us, our heart goes out to these kids. I think life is hard. They feel the economic insecurities of their decisions or the weight of the debt that their family has taken on to pursue this degree.
Yep.
And I think it's hard with social media, with the technology. It's not.
Yeah.
I don't know. My heart goes out to them. I think these are really hard asks of them to sort of live fully, but also be present with your schoolwork, to figure out who you are.
Yeah.
So,
No. Yeah. No, I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the resilience and the maturity. I have one of those. He's 22. He's graduating next year, and of course, you know, I don't like that the smartphone is glued to his hand like any other he's no longer a teenager, right? But at the same time, I think they are more aware of the world, and their challenges are really, you know, something else, to be honest with you, right? They are dealing with so much. Anyway, the reason why we're talking is the book, and the reason why I think your book is important is because I think it illustrates that big tech doesn't just happen, right? Which is sort of the prevailing paradigm in people's head, that there's progress happens by itself, and the next thing that happens is happening at this time, at this place, in this way, in this specific way, because of the logic of it. I think your book deconstructs all that in a very approachable way, but also I love the data that is based not on just theory. There's theory, but also there is data. So I love that combination of, you know, of explaining in an informed way, doing actually scientifically valid surveys and so forth. So I like how you are getting folks to start thinking about how technology happens, the political context of technology, right? And so. So my first question, I guess I'm going to start with the basic question of, so Uber was founded, I believe, in 2009, right, in San Francisco. And then 4 years later, they came to DC to conquer.
2 years later.
2 years later? 11. Is that right?
Yeah, in late 2011.
2011. I had it to 2013. So a couple of years later, they went and to attack DC, so to speak. Why did they pick DC first of all, and what and why? And I'll just bundle these two questions together. Why did they pick DC, and why was there resistance by DC initially to Uber's entrance into the market?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I'm not a business scholar. I don't know exactly why Uber picked, but I can guess as to why DC became important to Uber's playbook in the US. Mm-hmm. For one reason, DC at that time, DC was the sixth city in which Uber rolled out. And when it did, one of the things that made DC attractive to a company like Uber was the fact that we had some of the highest rates of smartphone adoption. And we also had a huge number of young professionals with disposable income. And so those two factors were very attractive to a company like Uber, thinking about who its clientele would be. DC also is important to Uber's story, and why it was important early on is because we don't have a state that could possibly undermine any kind of advance that Uber would make at the city level. So it was important to Uber to make sure that the laws that they got adopted here in 2012 and then again in 2014 would be the top, right? They didn't have to worry about any kind of state preemption. Even though the irony, of course, Ahmed, is that actually state preemption has been Uber's game ever since. But at the time, they didn't have to worry about state preemption because DC, as you know, is governed solely by, the mayor and the 13-member city council.
Yeah.
So why was there resistance? There was such little resistance, Ahmed. I'll say there were three kinds of resistance, okay, at that time. In early 2012, we have folks like Ron Linton, who was a lifelong regulator and the chair of the DC Taxi Commission. He was really upset because to him, regulations make sense out of chaos. And he felt that this entity was coming in and blatantly disregarding rules, okay, common rules that help to make the city function. So he was very upset about that. We also had two other groups that were really upset for good reason. One was the taxi industry that were rightly concerned about what would happen to the livelihoods of their workers who are primarily immigrants, first-generation immigrants, as well as people of color. And second was folks in the disabled rider community. These are disability advocates who had worked for decade plus to try to get the taxi industry and the public transit authorities to provide mobility services for their constituents, for their, the folks that they were worried about. And so the worry was, and it turned out to be true, that Uber would stymie any progress they had made, which of course it did. And so there was resistance on those three fronts, right? About disability rights, about taxi worker, working conditions, as well as sort of this question. And in some ways, Ron Linton was a lone wolf in this. But, what happens when companies flout laws? Is this okay? We could almost see it as like a pre-MAGA kind of showdown between Ron Linton and Silicon Valley, where do rules matter? Who makes them? Who follows them, right?
Yeah. And so basically Uber came in and in essence, or in a nutshell, disregarded many laws and just created facts on the ground, as they say.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And they won.
And how did that unfold? Like, give me an example of where they flouted a regulation or a law, and they just did the did the prosecutors or how come the law was not upheld? Give me an example if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Uber came to town, it did not purchase commercial insurance for its workers that is required for chauffeur services. It also allowed for the surge pricing or dynamic pricing as opposed to a metered pricing, right? That would be based on time and distance.
Yeah.
And so the concern was that these were unlicensed drivers. Well, they weren't unlicensed at the time. At the time that Uber arrived, it was actually Uber Black. So all of the workers actually were licensed at that time, but they weren't protected with commercial insurance. And they certainly didn't also have chauffeur licenses that were registered with the city in the same way that taxi and limo services were.
What does that mean? I'm sorry, you said at the beginning that these they were licensed. What does that mean? Okay,
so Uber rolled out in two ways. When you and I talk about Uber today, we are probably talking about Uber X, which is, somebody, just uses their, Toyota Camry 4-door to come and pick you up, right? That car has not been inspected. It doesn't have commercial insurance, and it does not, the person who's driving it doesn't have a commercial license.
Mm-hmm.
So when Uber arrived in 2011, in early 2012, it was flouting all of these rules that had been set up to try to limit how many chauffeur services are on the road, right? How many cabs, so that we don't have a tremendous amount of congestion, but also so that we can keep track of whether these vehicles are safe, whether the passengers are protected, things like that. Now, was the taxi industry at that time corrupt and full of all kinds of issues, including racism and and discrimination issues against disabled riders? Yes. Does that broken system mean that we should totally disregard it? I don't think so, but many people did. And I think the fact that the system was broken in many ways helped a lot of regulators say that, maybe we need something new. Maybe we're open to this. The reality is that the law that DC council members allowed to be passed in late 2012 had little effect on Uber's operations. Basically, Uber got anything they wanted. which to them meant no governmental oversight. There's even an anti-FOIA provision in that 2012 law, which says that any data the city is able to access about the operations of these entities cannot be FOIA'd. Which means that it's almost like they put a black veil over Uber. So we can't see where it is, how many cars are operating. You know, it's very hard to regulate something you can't see.
Yeah.
The other thing, for instance, is that like chauffeur services at the time had to pay a 25-cent tax on every ride to the city. Uber said, we don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. Instead, we want to pay 1% so that the city couldn't figure out the volume of the rides or the concentration based on location.
Okay. So can we say that there was a law in the books, right? And then that law was violated by a company. Can we say that? Okay. Yep. So now, in an ideal world, when a violation happens, what would happen? Like, what is supposed to happen?
So there's a few things that can happen. I mean, the Office of the Attorney General can get involved. I mean, you know, for Ron Linton, this lifelong regulator I mentioned, right? He created a sting to try to get the public focused on this issue, to get the press involved. He had the first Uber driver that, you know, he took a ride with, he had the vehicle impounded and the driver fined $1,600. Mm-hmm. And he wanted a cease and desist letter to be sent, and he was able to send it, but then the DC Council undid it.
Right, but no, just bear with me because I'm trying to walk through this and understand where things failed. So a law was broken. Say the Attorney General should have or could have done what? Like issued
a cease and desist letter, supported the DC Taxi Commission in its efforts to try to delegitimize this new chauffeur service.
Right. And then why didn't that happen? Why didn't the Attorney General do their job? Because the law was broken. Like, for example, if somebody goes and shoplifts or goes and hits somebody in the face, right, somebody's going to arrest them.
A lot of people were sympathetic to the problems that people felt with the taxi industry. And so the taxi industry had very few defenders.
Yeah, but I'm trying to see if the mechanism of the law, let's say somebody was being abused verbally by another person, right? And that person just couldn't take it anymore. They were calling him all kinds of ungodly names, and they just punched him in the face. The police is not going to say, or the Attorney General, or the, you know, whoever is not going to say, you know, we sympathize with your feelings, and so therefore we're not going to arrest you. How come, like, mechanically,
there was already almost a decade of conversation about how to modernize the taxi industry among regulators. They had already, it was generally agreed upon that things were broken, they weren't doing well, things were a problem. And so the promise of a new app to come in and help address these issues was sort of like perfect storm, right? It came into a city and a conversation in which there was already debates about how to fix this problem. And so Uber arrives and doesn't look like a problem. It looks like the long-awaited savior.
Yeah. So
it makes sense. I mean, this is one of the things we tried to unearth in the book is how did it make sense to so many people?
Yeah, we'll get to that. But I just wanted sort of to highlight that laws are not things that have legs and get up and do things, right? Laws are mediated by human beings who have a lot
and they have to be remade and strengthened and renegotiated, right? And protected, and they can fall apart just as quickly as they can fall together. I mean, they're just agreements among humans, and you know, when
exactly. So that was why I was sort of insisting on understanding the mechanism and why it didn't, just so that the audience understands that, you know, for example, just the fact that you were punched in the face, right? Is not going to mean that that the law will be on your side unless you're wearing a suit and perhaps you're a white man as opposed to, you know, a minority. Maybe you deserved it, and maybe the police will ignore you or not ignore you, right? So there is that human element in there. And so folks really have to, and I keep saying this because I was telling you, right, I'm an activist, and I'm always looking to ways to get people to get it, right? That the fact that there's a law, that fact does not protect you. You have to get involved.
Of course.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sure you as well as I, as probably as everybody in the audience, we use Uber, right? We use Uber to to take care of our transportation. Usually, like, oh man, I need to go there, and I don't want to take my car. I just want to take an Uber. So we do that, right? And so there is definitely value. Although to be honest with you, since they have the metro, they've had the metro to go to the airport, to National, and to Dulles. I wish they changed the name of that airport. And then to Baltimore. I've used Uber less, and I'm happy about that, to be honest with you.
Well, there's also Curb. I mean, there are other options in DC.
Yeah. But sort of just so that we we keep our feet on the ground and don't say, hey, nobody's using Uber. We do use
Of
Uber,
course.
right? There's value, and we'll get into what's the plus of all that, right? So as I was saying, because the metro now goes to National Airport and so forth, I use it a lot more. I live in McLean, and my wife drops me at the local McLean metro station, and which is new, like no more than 2 years old. So now I'm all set, and I'm happy about that, right? Public transportation, right? Thank God, right? So Uber and all these companies know, I'm sure they're not aware of the fact that I am now I'm using less Uber, and the more public transportation becomes convenient and available and affordable and better and so on, the more they'll be hurt, right? Is that true? Is that okay to say? Like, this is just common sense in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, look, Uber even puts out in its SEC filings that it's a competitor for these entities.
Right.
It is a zero. They used to pretend, 10 years ago it was complementary. No, it's not.
It's not, right? And so can we go to the next sort of inference, which is therefore Uber is going to try to undermine say legislation or projects that are geared towards making the infrastructure of public transportation better. Is that fair? And if so, do you have any data points for us of what kind of things they're doing to undermine?
I mean, we know with Lyft, for instance, that they have announced that they are interested, I believe, in selling off the bike share that they operate in New York City, because they realize that customers that are using the bikes don't always turn into ride-hail customers.
So their strategy didn't work. I see.
This whole idea of, we want all ships to rise, all boats to rise, I mean, that's not. Uber has definitely made strides to try to undermine labor advances with the paratransit programs in the DC area. So, but are they aggressively trying to undermine it? I don't know. I mean, I think their presence is enough to convince a lot of policymakers that there are better ways to operate. I worry about the 911 systems that are using Uber, about the cities that have, sort of gotten in bed with them for that end. We know that some of the cities that got rid of their public bus system in favor of Uber have ended up with no transportation options after a few years, because Uber raised its rate and the city couldn't afford it. So the relationship, Uber says on one hand that we operate best in places where there are existing transportation systems. That may be true because of volume, but certainly I think Uber benefits a lot when these metro systems or subway systems or public bus systems have shortfallings.
Yeah. And
you can look at the places in the world that have wonderful public transit options, right? Are there, tremendously strong chauffeur services that operate sort of in this ad hoc independent contractor model? Not often.
Or far less prevalent.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you mentioned 911 services. Can you explain what that is? Is it 911 using Uber as a what does that mean?
So it means that, like, for instance, when my kid last broke his arm, we were at Children's Hospital, and they wanted me to take a survey about whether or not I would have considered, instead of taking the ambulance, we would have taken a Uber, right? So it means about when hospitals are doing studies to think about how to save money, would we have taken an Uber? Well, the reality is, right, there is a problem, right, that these ambulatory services are extremely expensive and not supported, and the hospital and the public health system in the U.S. has a host of problems. So Uber coming in and offering a possible inroad, I mean,
Yeah.
it's understandable, but it's also really worrying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing that we probably should keep in mind is it's not just a choice between the status quo and Uber, right? Maybe we should invest in, being creative.
Public infrastructure.
Yeah.
Of course, municipal operations, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's sort of the trap, the conceptual trap that people fall into, which is like, well, you see, well, the bus system sucks, and so the only option is Uber.
Well, and it's the same argument we see about gentrification, right? Oh, but isn't gentrification good because it brings grocery store and amenities? And it's like, come on, that's like sort of like saying a hurricane is good because it waters a garden. No, there's like a host of options between a drought and a hurricane. We can water things well. We can build neighborhoods with amenities without encouraging displacement. We can also think about public transit woes as something that need not be solved by a Silicon Valley Rouge contender,
Yeah. Which brings me to my next point. So like this is an instance for me of sort of truncated, short-circuited thinking, like black and white here and there, not too many options, therefore, and so forth, right? Sort of it limits your imagination to the extent that you are a passive recipient or a consumer of what is out there. So my next point really is the following, which I loved. I think it was Uber. I think in part of their core strategy you came across in your book is they need to move fast, right? They need to move fast because moving fast means less thinking, less organizing, less resistance, right? Tell me more about that, because I think that is part of, because after all this, at the end, I'm going to brainstorm with you for like a couple of minutes about lessons learned for someone who wants to be an active citizen as opposed to just somebody who needs to choose between, things as if they were, God dictated, right? But the concept of moving fast.
Yeah. Move fast, break things, right?
Right. Why is that important for the Ubers and the Amazons out there?
I think so. I don't know. Ahmed, did you read Palo Alto, that new book by Malcolm Harris?
I read a couple of reviews of it.
Okay.
But tell me.
Well, it makes an argument about sort of this. It gives a bit of a background, let's say a prehistory to Uber, we could think, because it talks about sort of this Palo Alto mentality that is not unique to Palo Alto, but, Palo Alto birthed one version of it, right? Which is that move fast and break things, right? Disregard regulation, fight for things, it's not like, let's all take care of each other. It's like the best man wins, zero-sum game. And Stanford was involved, the railroad systems. I mean, if we look at sort of thinking about even the history of the internet or internetwork computers, I mean, Uber just looks like an extension of all of these projects that saw regulation as something to be gamed, as something to be undermined, and the financial system as something to use to benefit a very few, power to be concentrated. And so the move fast and break things is sort of the anathema of what I think good public, governance is, which is move slowly and heal things, right? It's tedious and awful and annoying and necessary to make disagreements, part of our decision-making process. But I think it's necessary. And what Silicon Valley savors and cherishes and promotes, right, is this like disregard for what came before, disrespect, right? And think about an empire project. This is sort of like on speed, a version of it, in a very narrow, this technology, sector. But it need not be sort of limited to that.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rokos. Thanks for listening.